Hello, friends. Welcome to the Veterinary Life Coach Podcast. Today, I have a wonderful and interesting guest for you. His name is Duncan Bhaskaran Brown, and he's a speaker, coach, and author. He studied at Cornell University, and he wrote the books Get Over Indulgence and Real Men Quit. And he continues to do research about substance abuse and recovery and help people through his coaching. He helps people power up their productivity, improve relationships, and enjoy life. Welcome to the podcast, Duncan. I'm thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to having a bit of a chat.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I don't know that I've had anybody with your background and story before, so I'm excited to hear about what you have to teach us.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll try to live up to the billing.
Hey, whatever you talk about, I'll be interested. I just have one of those kind of brains that I just love people. So I always ask people on my podcast the first question to tell me their story. So can you tell me your story as much or as little as you want, how you got to where you are today?
So the first thing that I did that kind of got me here was to start drinking. And
Mm,
I think it's a story that a lot of people will recognize. I'm stood outside of a party, kind of in an empty warehouse. There's it's full of banging music, flashing lights, sweating bodies. And I want to go inside. I really do want to go inside because I know this is going to be an amazing party, but I'm scared, I'm
mhm.
petrified. Part of me just wants to go home and hide under the duvet. And then one of my friends just turns around to me and says, Duncan, just have this. Hands me a can of warm, cheap lager. And, I drink it and I think, well, this it's not up to much, is it? It's not really having much of an effect. I don't know. When I sort of get into the second one, I start to realize that, I can feel something in my feet. It's kind of this little tingling in my feet, and it sort of rises up, goes through my legs, goes into my stomach, ends up in my chest. By the time it's got to my head, I'm raring through the door. I'm full of confidence. I didn't walk onto the dance floor. I strutted onto the dance floor. And, it seemed like all of my Christmases had come at once. It seemed like I was funnier, like I was more confident, like I was better looking. I mean, I even managed to impress that girl in Form F. It was amazing. It was a fantastic evening. I thought, right, this is it. I've got it made. And so, I started drinking at social events, and it started off being very, very social. I wouldn't drink huge amounts. I'd just drink a bit at a party, next weekend, another party. But what happened over time was the amount of people that I was drinking with slowly went down and down and down and down. And the amount that I was drinking slowly went up and up and up and up. And it got to the point where I was sitting on my own in my flat, drinking a couple of bottles of wine pretty much every day. And you know what? I was just miserable by that point.
So how do you go from drinking socially and for courage, basically, is how it started, right? How do you go from there to being at home drinking? Like what happens to your brain? How does it go from, it being just social to actual abuse?
Well, I just keep doing it. It's
Really?
the simple fact is that repeated exposure to things like alcohol, will inevitably lead you into some problems. Particularly if you start drinking when you're a teenager, because of course your brain isn't fully developed at that point, and therefore drinking alcohol at that age has more of an impact on the way your brain develops. And yeah, I mean, I just put in the hours. I just did it a lot, and that's pretty much how I got to the point where it wasn't any fun anymore. And I wasn't getting out of bed in the morning and drinking. Far from it. I mean, I was pretty successful. Everything else in my life looked like it was going pretty well, but I just couldn't seem to deal with the stress, handle the difficult things if I didn't have that drink, in the evening before I went to bed.
Yeah. And what's the chemical part of it? I mean, I guess because I haven't studied alcoholism, what's the feedback that you're getting? Obviously you feel something, right? But what's the positive feedback loop that brings you into it becoming such a habit?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, alcohol affects your brain in many, many ways, and it alters a lot of different brain chemicals. The one that's been most extensively studied and is kind of implicated in the addictive process tends to people tend to talk about dopamine the most, and that sort of that tallies with my experience that and it tallies with a lot of people's experience that we go out and we drink and we feel better, we get these positive feelings when we drink alcohol. And bizarrely, that seems to be what we remember. Even if we actually, drank so much we made ourselves ill the next day, or, we made an idiot of ourselves at the party, we still remember it in a fairly positive way. We still learn to associate drinking with positive things, almost despite what actually happens. And I think that's, partly the role of dopamine. And it basically teaches us to drink. And we learn that drinking in certain situations makes us feel better, therefore we just keep drinking in those situations. But like I say, it has a real huge impact on a lot of neurotransmitters. So it affects things like GABA and serotonin, which massively affect your mood. So when you start drinking, you get a little spike in them, and that feels nice. But your brain, it doesn't like these kind of spikes, does it? So it sort of like gives you it tries to remove it all, and that's why the next day when you wake up and you feel in a much lower mood, you feel a little bit more anxious, a lot less empathetic. That's because you've kind of spent all of your neurotransmitters last night and you're running low the next day.
So when you find yourself, how long did it take for you to realize that it wasn't something that you wanted to continue doing? Like what spiked you to start to say, wait a minute, this isn't working?
So I mean, I don't think I really realized it wasn't working until after I stopped, but luckily I did. And what happened was I was pretty successful in a lot of respects. If you looked at my life, you'd have said, "Oh yeah, I know Duncan's doing well for himself." And if you'd asked me, I would have told you I was doing well for myself because I've always talked a good game. But I was miserable, and despite that, I had managed to form a meaningful relationship with a rather nice lady, and we got married, and we had jobs, we had the house, we had all of the adult stuff. So we thought the logical thing to do is to start a family. So we tried to start a family, which was quite good fun. And my wife got pregnant, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. And those kind of like those completely foolish, naive, stupid parents, right at the start of the journey, that was absolutely us. We were just like walking around, big, smiles on our faces, until we met that nurse in that screening room, and she told my wife she was having a miscarriage. And then it all kind of fell apart.
Wow.
And obviously, that was incredibly hard on my wife, emotionally, physically, mentally. It had a huge effect on her. But what I know made it worse was I just wasn't there for her. My default
Mm.
response to stress, to hard times, to difficult emotions was very much just to pour myself into a bottle of wine. So
Wow.
I looking back on it, I know now that I wasn't there to support her the way she really needed me to. And it got very difficult. And I think that sort of forced me to look at my life, forced me to sort of ask myself the questions, what am I here for? What is the point of Duncan? What am I doing? Kind of thing. And sadly, I never had one of those moodily lit moments where you're staring into the mirror at 4 a.m. and that perfect question just comes to mind and it
Right.
all clicks into place. But now I know that that perfect question basically was, do I want another drink, or do I want to start a family?
Oh,
Of course, the
wow.
good news is I made the right decision, and almost 9 months to the day after I stopped drinking, our daughter was born, which was fantastic and amazing and wonderful. But that gave me a whole other world of problems, didn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've raised two kids myself, so I can totally get that. That is a big life change. So did you turn it around easily or was it difficult? Like, tell me that story. Like, how did you like absolutely quit drinking? Did you consider yourself an alcoholic and you like absolutely swore off alcohol, or how does that work?
Yeah, so in some respects, I found it quite easy because I think honestly, the stopping drinking bit is not that hard. And I don't want to like kind of criticize anybody who struggle with it because people out there do struggle with it. But I think what they tend to struggle with is not the stopping bit, it's the staying stopped bit. And
Right.
I struggled with that as well. I mean, I stopped drinking just over 9 years ago, and I haven't drunk since. So in that respect, it was quite successful. I also have to kind of point out that I'm very lucky, and my experience is not the same as a lot of people's because I had a lot of support around me. I had a wife who, despite it all, still loved me and stood by me, and I had a job which. Well, I mean, I hated it, but at least it paid the bills. I had somewhere to live. I was very involved in my community, so I had a sense of meaning and purpose. I had a good friendship group, so I had a lot of stuff that actually, made it easier for me to stop. So, in one respect, yes, it was very easy to stop drinking, and it was almost enjoyable. It would, but in the kind of couple of years afterwards, I certainly had to make a lot of other changes to my life, which were often difficult, and I resisted, and yeah.
So were there other things that you tried to replace that alcohol with, or like how did that show up? Because, I've not had an alcohol problem, but I definitely struggle with food. Like I have that sweet tooth kind of like dopamine problem with food. So I kind of get that same, it's kind of the same thing, right? So tell me how all that went.
Yeah, no, no, very much. I absolutely agree with you. I think it is very similar. I mean, the obvious difficulty. I think it's harder with food because you can just stop drinking alcohol. In fact, many of your listeners probably should. But you can't kind of stop eating food. You
Right.
have to find another way to do it. So, in one respect, stopping drinking is a bit easier because you just say, right, that's it. I'm done with it. I'm never going to do it again. And you effectively only make one decision. Whereas every time you open your mouth to put some food in it, you're making a decision, aren't you?
Right.
But yeah, so the problem that I had, funnily enough, was around food. Um, when our daughter was pretty young, my wife got quite ill, and that was very difficult. It meant that I spent a bit of time sort of almost being a single father and working and trying to juggle a lot of things. And that was very stressful. I mean, it's very stressful having a small child as well. Anyway, isn't it? So um, when it got really stressful, what I found myself doing was eating in an unhealthy way because my mind had sort of said to me, well, now you don't drink, Duncan. You can eat whatever you like. Yeah, it turns out that that is not true.
That's not true either, right?
Not at all. And I got to the point where, I put my daughter to bed, I got her to sleep, and I was on my own in the dark, and I was just like miserable. Start eating these like triple chocolate chip cookies, and I wasn't enjoying them. I mean, they didn't taste nice. They were just like, you know, very, very sweet and just kind of almost sickly. And they made me feel terrible. As I was eating them, I could feel myself getting worse and worse and worse. And just kind of looked down at this packet of cookies and went, you know what, Duncan, you're eating the way you used to drink. And that was, the time when I thought, right, yeah, I've got to do something about it. So I used a lot of the same strategies that I used to stop drinking to get my diet into place. So yeah, that was one of those things that I really needed to work on after I stopped drinking, and I definitely fell into that trap. And it's so common. It happens to a lot of people, particularly when you stop drinking. A lot of people have a problem with food because your body starts to crave sugar a little bit because there's a lot of sugar in alcohol. So if you kind of cut that out of your diet, it's not unnatural for your brain to go, you can eat as much ice cream as you like, Duncan.
Yeah, my brain says that sometimes too. That ice cream, yeah. So, how do you, when you're coaching someone through this, let's say some of my listeners out there think they're struggling with alcohol or they're unsure, if they're at that point where they're struggling, or if they think they are, how do you get them, number one, to determine whether it's a problem for them? And we'll start with alcohol. And then number two, what do you coach them to do about it first?
Yeah, so I use some diagnostic tools. I've got a particular 12 question tool that will very nicely put people into one of four brackets. The first being low risk drinker, or you don't drink. Can't be a risk if you don't do it, can it? The second being this kind of like moderate risk drinking, which is going to be around where the government says the safe limit is. And of course, it varies from country to country what they consider the safe limit to be. But you'll be around that, probably maybe a bit above it, maybe a bit below it, but around that sort of area. And then the next one would be the kind of severe risk category, whereby you aren't necessarily at full out problem drinking, but that is the direction it is definitely going in. And you would need to reduce your drinking at the very least. You need to think about it and do something about it. And then there's the flat out problem drinking, the very high risk category. So, that diagnostic tool is very robust. It's very clever. It's very, precise. But sometimes I think, there can be only one question, or there should be only one question on that. It's like, are you on the internet asking questions about whether you're drinking too much or not? Because if the answer is yes, then the answer is yes, you are. Because people who have a healthy relationship with alcohol don't tend to Google, am I drinking too much? To being slightly flippant about that, I think if you think you've got a problem with it, then the chances are, well, you have. I mean, that's the whole point. If you're thinking about it, it's a problem. It's problem drinking. If it's causing you problems, it's a problem. So do something about it. What you're going to do depends on where you are in the process. I meet some people, and it's abundantly obvious very quickly that they really do need to just stop drinking and never drink again. They have fundamentally altered the way alcohol affects their brain, and therefore they can't ever drink a low risk healthy amount. They're always gonna have one, and it's always just going to go horribly wrong from there. So some people are like that, but then again, I meet other people who maybe aren't quite so far down that particular road, and trying sort of a more controlled approach to drinking, that might work for them. And there's a lot of great strategies out there. I'm sure all of your listeners have heard of mindfulness. That's a great way of not simply reducing the amount of you drink, but actually taking a bit more pleasure in it, because so much of the alcohol we drink, it's just automatic. We don't even think about it. It's Netflix, so we'll have a drink. Dinner, so we'll have a drink. Out with friends, we'll have a drink. Sport, we'll have a drink. And you don't really think about it. You drink the same thing, and you almost aren't paying attention when you do. And the great thing about mindfulness is it kind of interrupts that, and it makes you think about it, makes you pay attention. And I think that's a great way of reducing the amount you drink, but also taking a bit more pleasure from it.
Yeah, and that's true with everything, right? Is being present and mindful is going to help you realize when it is a problem and what you're actually doing. Because I mean, from the standpoint of alcohol, I'm sure it gets to the point where you don't even remember how many drinks you've had or pay any attention. And the same thing with food. You eat one cookie or you eat 10, and you don't even think about the 9 in between.
Yeah, so the example I always give for that is when I was a smoker, my wife used to think I was really neat and tidy because I'd empty the ashtray all the time. And it's like, I'm not emptying the ashtray for your benefit. I just don't want to see how much I've smoked.
Right. You're trying to fool your brain.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your advice or talk about that? Because I think that's something that we're all really good at, right? We're all good at lying to ourselves about whatever issue we're having, whether it's stress or anxiety or food or relationships. What's your thought about that? About the lies we tell ourselves?
So I'm not a marketing expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm going to rebrand that. And I don't think we're really good at lying to ourselves. I just think we're really good at telling ourselves stories.
Yes.
And if you accept that you're really good at telling yourself stories, then the way in is the way out, isn't it? How did you get yourself into this mess? I told myself a story about alcohol, about how it made me confident, it made me funny, it made me good looking. How did I get out? I just told myself a different story.
The
And I
opposite.
think that's the enormous power that we have. You can change your beliefs. You just need to actually identify them, bring them out into the open, and question them. Like, is that helping you to live the life you want to live? Are these the actions of the person that you aspire to be? Or, I mean, with a lot of beliefs around alcohol. So a lot of people believe alcohol helps you to relax and it removes stress. And that is very easy to assess from a purely scientific point of view. If alcohol helped you to relax, if it got rid of stress, it would reduce your cortisol levels. I'm sure all your listeners know cortisol is the stress hormone. So that's
Right.
what alcohol would do if it was helping you with stress. But it doesn't. Every unit of alcohol raises your cortisol levels by 3%. So there you go. It's very easy to
The
sort of
opposite.
like assess some of them from the point of view of truth. And if you believe stuff that isn't true and it's making you act in a certain way that isn't helping you live the life that you want to live, you've got to take those beliefs and stick them in the clinical waste.
Yeah, chuck them out the window, right? Yeah, I think it's easier said than done though, right? If your brain is really wired to have these stories about your past, and a lot of them are victim stories, I think. Like, was there any victim story that you had that caused you to push into alcohol and food? Except
Oh
that
yeah,
you were
no,
shy, right?
absolutely. I mean, I never drank because I wanted to. It was always because other people made me do it. It's
Oh,
like
okay.
literally every time. It was my boss. He was making my life so stressful that I had to drink. It was my wife making these unreasonable demands of me, like talking to her and stuff. Um, it was always about that. There was always a reason why I was doing it, and it was absolutely never ever my fault. So yeah, that's that's one of the biggest changes I think that has come with sobriety. Not straight away. That's something that I guess it gave me the opportunity to work on things like that, and it gave me the ability to develop the self-awareness and the emotional intelligence to realize that actually, nobody is responsible for my actions other than myself.
Right. And that's a big lesson about everything, is that you can't control other people and they can't control you. You're always in charge of yourself, right?
Yeah, I'm currently attempting to teach it to my 8-year-old daughter, which is it's always fun.
Yeah, how does that go?
Well, I think patience, that's the only thing. And there's only one piece of parenting advice that I think is worth listening to at all, and that is that your children will ignore everything you say and copy everything that you do.
Mm,
So there's an awful lot of modeling, but there's a lot of patiently discussing stuff. And I think I'm too much the coach to actually tell her what to do. I try and help her think things through.
yeah, that's a good approach to it, isn't it? To let them kind of make their own decisions in a safe way. I mean, you can't let an 8-year-old make all their decisions, but
No, 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 because let's face it, we'd be eating Haribo for breakfast.
exactly. So let me ask you about, let's come at it from a standpoint of either being the boss of someone or in a relationship with someone or a family member of someone that you believe is using or abusing alcohol to a fault, or I can't think of the right word, but if you observe someone else overindulging, what are your recommendations for that, being their boss or in a relationship with them?
So I think if you're somebody's boss and you figured out that they've got a problem with drinking, like congratulations, well done, because we really do try and hide it, and that's I
Sure.
think an important thing that you've got to realize. Most people are going to be quite defensive. They're not going to want to necessarily hide it and reveal it to their boss. So if you're starting to suspect, then I think the attitude is the starting point. So we've we've come a long way in the last 10 years. And I think now people look at things like depression, anxiety, and we see it in a very similar way to the way we see physical illness. We think, well, if you have an issue with depression, it's like having a broken leg. You need to go and get the treatment, you need to go and get the help. And I think we just need to go one step further and realize that actually it's exactly the same with alcohol. In fact, it's the same with any kind of substance abuse problem, or indeed process abuse problem. So, problems with Facebook or gambling or online pornography or gaming or anything like that. It's all the same thing. And we need to sort of start to view it with compassion, not that people have got a moral failing, but that they have got a mental health problem that they need some help with. And these days, most companies will have an employee assistance program, and that will offer something. Is that going to be enough? Usually not, but it's a start. There are also an awful lot of great resources out there. And I think that's the number one thing I'd say to, anybody, friends, loved ones, bosses. Honestly, an hour on the internet and you can learn an awful lot about about problem drinking. So getting yourself educated is always a good idea, because then you're approaching it from the right point of view. Of course, it is a little bit different if you're in a relationship or it's your child, and you probably want to be a bit more proactive about that. And I think the first thing to realize is that I don't want to sound like I'm trashing my mum. I always end up sounding like I'm trashing my mum when I talk about this. And I love my mum and she's great and everything. But what she would always do was she'd tell me that it was killing me, or it was going to ruin my life, or it was going to, and that everything she did made me scared. It made me stressed. It made me nervous. And of course, what did I do when I was stressed, scared and nervous? Yeah, I just drank. And I'm not saying it's my mum's fault. Obviously, it's not.
Right.
But I think that is the default response that a lot of people have when they see their loved one destroying themselves. They tell them that it's destroying them. And I get that. It comes from a place of love. I do absolutely understand that. But it makes things worse. So hard as it is, you've got to find a way of talking with it where they don't feel threatened, where they feel like you are trying to help them and offering them some support. And I think if you've done a little bit of research and you've learned a little bit yourself, then you're in a position to kind of say, look, you know what? There are a lot of people who got out of this. So I work a lot with men, and I always think the best way to convince us is to, point out one of our heroes who got sober. So if the guy in question likes acting, just talk about Robert Downey Jr. or Anthony Hopkins. If they like Formula One, Lewis Hamilton doesn't drink. If they like American football, Tom Brady. Oh no, actually that might not work for everyone. I mean, it's a bit of a wedge issue, isn't he, Tom Brady? But you get my point. Whatever field you're looking in, business, there are so many successful sober business people. So, actually, if they're into podcasts, there are a lot of very successful sober podcasters, and not just the ones that, do podcasts about sobriety. So whatever field they're interested in, you can find great examples of people who've got sober, point them in the right direction, help them learn a little bit. And, there are a lot of people out there that want to help.
Yeah. Like you, because you coach people, correct?
Yeah. So what I do is, based around cognitive reframing or cognitive realignment. And, I take a very much coaching approach. And, there are other people that do what I do. They're not quite as funny as I am, though. But there are also group programs. AA is the most famous by far of the group programs, but there's a lot of other ones out there. Smart Recovery is a secular recovery program based on cognitive behavioral therapy, and is, in my opinion, is a very solid and robust program. But there are an awful lot. So, if they're a bit more social, then maybe point them towards a group program. Some people, drink because of unprocessed trauma that either happened to them when they were in their childhood or in their adult life. If that's the case, then they might want to take more of a therapeutic approach. But there are a lot of honestly, I meet a lot of people. Approximately 45% of people that stop drinking do it without any formal help. They do it by listening to podcasts and reading the books and, going online. So there is a lot out there, and, you will meet an awful lot of people that want to help out.
Yeah. How big of a problem is it in the UK? You're in the UK, right? In the UK
Yeah.
or here in the US, how big of a problem statistically is alcoholism or just
So
overindulgence?
yeah, in terms of alcohol, about 25% of the population is probably drinking at a problem drinking level. So about 25% of people, and 1 in 4 probably needs to do something about their drinking. Certainly, in America, 36% of Americans had a heavy drinking episode in the last 30 days. That's at least one heavy drinking episode. And, that the evidence is very clear on that. If you're getting to the point where it's described as heavy drinking, you are definitely causing yourself um, effects. So you will get a lot of effects over the next few days after that heavy drinking, and you will also be increasing your risks of things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and all the stuff that you don't want. So I mean, I think it's huge. I mean, it's kind of, to put it in context. I am not a fan of OxyContin. I am not a fan of Purdue Pharma. And I think I definitely don't want to sort of like do down any of the suffering that has caused. It's caused a huge amount of misery and just, ruined so many lives. But the simple fact is that, opioids kill about 80,000 Americans a year. Alcohol kills more than twice that.
Wow. And we don't
So
hear about it as much, right?
we don't talk about the alcohol epidemic, do we?
Right. No, we don't. You don't hear about it anyway.
No.
So that's why we need you, I guess.
Well,
So
I mean,
go ahead.
I was going to have a bit of a go at the media because they're basically just interested in new things, aren't they? So
Right.
if you sort of like really look at the history of coverage around drugs, it was like, oh my God, marijuana, it's the worst thing ever. And then they got bored with that. And it's like, oh my God, LSD, it's the worst thing ever. Oh my God, crack cocaine, it's the worst thing ever. And they just want something new to blame.
Right.
But the problem is, alcohol is not that new. So it's
Oh,
not news, is it?
not new at all, right?
No.
Yeah. So we don't hear about it. So talk to me a little bit about, I read in your bio that you help people power up, I think I said, your productivity. What does that mean to you?
So I mean, I think if you rebalance your relationship with food and you do the same with alcohol, if you get nicotine out of your life, just doing that, though, that sort of gives you a solid base from which to build on. And certainly my experience of, you know, changing my diet and stopping drinking and stopping smoking, it had a huge effect on my energy levels. And you can dig into all of the reasons why that is. I mean, just one point that generally doesn't get discussed enough is the effect alcohol has on your sleep. So even 2 glasses of wine is enough to reduce the quality of your sleep by about 24%. So that's the REM sleep, the deep sleep, the really important stuff. That's the quality that you're going to be losing. And that's just after a couple of glasses of wine. And of course, if you don't sleep well, then you're not as energetic. So that's a fundamentally an amazing way to power up your productivity. But that said, if you've already done that, if you're starting from that fairly good base, well, one of the things I like to help people do is just change their behavior to build in the kind of the habits that they actually want. I'm perfectly happy to help you remove habits you don't want, but then what do you do?
Yeah, you have to
Oh,
replace it with something, right?
exactly. So a lot of the tools that I teach, all of that stuff around beliefs, that's really important in terms of building up positive habits as well. Because what people do is they just focus on the behavior and they think, right, I'm going to go to the gym. And they go to the gym for a week or two and they absolutely hate it and they don't enjoy it, so they don't go back. Whereas actually, if you get to grips with your beliefs, a lot of people have a lot of beliefs around exercise, that it has to be a certain thing. Actually, a lot of people believe that exercising has to make you miserable, which it doesn't, of course. So getting to grips with those beliefs again can really help you. It can give you that good platform. You're going to ask yourself the question, are you uncomfortable in the gym? And is that simply because you don't think you're the kind of person that belongs in the gym? Oh, if you think that, you can persuade yourself to go to the gym a couple of times in January, but you're not going to stay there.
Right.
So using the same sort of techniques that I use around identity, around belief and thought management, they can help you to build those positive habits as well. And that, of course, is all productivity really is. You've got to have that base of energy, but then you've got to have the right habits that that help you achieve as much as you can in the time you've got.
Yeah. So trying to start with what you value and the beliefs that you currently have that are holding you back, to change them to the beliefs that you want to have in order to, let's say, go to the gym.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you just got to kind of you got to vote for the person you want to be, haven't you? That's what you get the option to do. When you get up in the morning, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the kind of person that checks their phone, or do you want to be the kind of person that does press ups? Because if you can really get it that deeply down into your core, your identity, then you're going to get out of bed and you're going to do the press ups.
Right. Right. But then what do you recommend to people that are they're so deep in their story that they don't believe that they're the type of person that can get up and do the exercise or go to the gym, and they're just basically stuck in that negativity loop? I call it the Chihuahua brain, that negative part of our brain that keeps telling us the bad things and the unfortunate things and the stories about ourselves. How do you dig them out of that? Like, I can ask myself all day, who do I want to be? But then if my brain says, well, you're not that person.
Yeah, I do like the Chihuahua brain. It's like just yapping at you, isn't it? It's like
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I
it's
chose the Chihuahua. I'm a veterinarian, so we see a lot of Chihuahuas, and they're all terrified and yappy, and they want to bite you, right? And
yeah,
that's kind
yeah.
of what my primitive brain feels like a lot of days.
No, you should be all over the animal analogies. But like to answer the question, so one of the things the tools that I use around thought management, I think is particularly helpful for that. So you've got to start by becoming aware. You've got to sort of like notice that you're doing that, and then you've got to sort of be able to observe that and think of that as a trigger. So what that does is you have that negative thought and it triggers this spiral of negative thoughts. So the first negative thought is the trigger, and then the spiral is the action. So once you start to notice the trigger and become aware of the trigger, then you can change the action, can't you? And
Right.
I would typically suggest you want to put something like a mantra in there. Now, the mantra that I teach a lot of people is "real men quit," because that's the kind of thing you can jump on the table and shout in your deepest sort of sobriety warrior
Right.
voice,
It's
and
simple and
it's
easy
good.
to remember.
Yeah, and it's good advertising.
For your book.
Get people to shout the name of your book regularly. But
That's right. I
no,
love
I
that.
mean, when I work with people, we do tend to come up with something that makes a bit more sense to them. Things like, I haven't come this far, just come this far. Hallelujah. Oh no, was it free at last? Praise the Lord, we're free at last. It's a Martin Luther King quote that I keep butchering, that one of my coaches was dead keen on. But you just come up with something that makes sense to you, that is, it's got to be positive and it's got to be affirming who you want to be. But you then, as soon as you feel those negative thoughts, as soon as you recognize them, then you're shouting your mantra. And then the last bit, which is most important of all, is you've got to celebrate. Now, I love dancing, and I keep trying to persuade people to celebrate by dancing. Doesn't really work because not everybody's as
Not
nuts
everyone
about it
likes
as me.
dancing.
No,
I
apparently,
do.
if you're in the shops, buying some cereal or something like that, in the breakfast aisle of the supermarket. Apparently, it's not that cool to dance, so I've been told. Anyway, there is one really easy, cheap, simple, free way of celebrating, and that is just smiling. And anyone can do that. And it's so
I love
powerful
that.
because, whether you're happy or not, when you smile, you get all of those happy brain chemicals. And, one of those is dopamine. And as we said earlier, that's implicated in learning. And it is, it's the way in is the way out. You taught yourself to behave in a particular way using dopamine. Teach yourself to behave in another way. You got to
To
use the
get that
dopamine.
dopamine. Yeah, I love that. I had someone just a couple weeks ago, I went to a veterinary hospital and was giving a talk. And one of the people that was there said, when we act happy, like with clients, we were talking about clients, it feels fake and it feels unauthentic. And like she was really fighting the fact that when you're in a service industry, you have to be kind to people and nice to people, and it didn't feel authentic to her. And so I like when you say smile, that it gives you those brain chemicals, because I think that would be a good answer to some question like that is, yes, you are pretending, but that pretending will eventually turn into a happy habit, and you will become more positive, and you will love the clients more, and you will be more on board. You won't feel as negative, because she was feeling very negative about her job because she thought she was being fake. And so I like that answer, is that she's retraining her brain.
But look, we become what we repeatedly do, don't we? And if you are repeatedly cheerful, then you will become cheerful.
I love
And
that.
I always wonder sometimes. I've worked with a few people in customer facing roles, and the big question I've always wanted to ask them is, why don't you like people? I mean, what is it about them?
That's a really
Because
good question.
yeah, I mean, I think, look, if you get 100 people, most of them are going to be pretty pleasant, aren't they? They're going to be quite nice to you. They give you the time of day. Some of them are going to be, a bit off, probably because they're in a bit of a bad mood. And then maybe one of them is going to be genuinely wrong. And like you're never going to get through to them. But, even the ones that are in a bad mood, it's just they're in a bad mood. They're on a bad day, they probably had to take their pet to the vets. That would probably do it, wouldn't it? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, their
yeah.
dog puked on their carpet or something, right?
Yeah, and I think it can be really difficult when you're in that kind of industry where, you know, eh, everybody's stressed. That's why they've come to see you, because they're stressed.
They're stressed, right? Yeah, it is
Yeah.
hard. But I think you're right. If we can keep the mindset that most people are kind and most people are open and happy, and we forget that because our brain is so, you know, focused on the negative and picking up the negative. We're looking for that rather than the 100 people that were kind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, people do stupid things. Sometimes people do evil things, but it doesn't actually make them stupid and evil.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. And
So
if you, I mean, that's what we try and drum into our children, isn't it? It's that you are not bad. You just did a bad behavior, didn't you? It's like your customers are not bad. They just did a bad behavior, didn't they?
yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. I love that. Especially if you thought of them as your children.
I'd love to say there was a massive difference between children and adults. Actually, I helped my daughter's class. They had a trip round around our town to some of the historic buildings. And I thought, well, I know a little bit about the history of the town, so I'll go along and share my wisdom. But all I did was, try and stop them running into roads and killing themselves. But it did, sometimes I sort of think, well, when I do training with adults, it's like they're a bit different. They're a bit quieter sometimes, but it's all the same thing. I mean, they don't try and run into the road, but they've all got their like, oh, this and that and the other, and they're like, you've got to sort their problems out. And I'd love to say that they were very different to a bunch of 8-year-olds, but
Yeah, but it might help you to think of them as children. You might be kinder in a lot of ways, less judgy. So what have I not asked you about that you want to talk about? Or what should
oh,
we know? What should my veterinarians know from you?
we haven't talked about Morris dancing yet. That's always
Oh,
good.
let's talk about that. Tell me about that. Morris, Morris.
Absolutely.
Dancing? Okay, explain that to me because I don't know what that is. I tap dance, but I don't know what Morris is.
Well, it's like tap dancing, but without the taps, and not necessarily in time to the music, and probably not as good. So
Really?
yeah, well, it's kind of folk dancing. So actually, tap dancing, of course, evolved from clog dancing, which is a kind of Morris dancing or folk dancing, but they have heavy wooden soled shoes, and they had iron cleats on the bottom of them, and the dancing was very much about banging your feet on the floor and making a bit of a noise. And of course, it moved on a little bit and became tap dancing. Anyway, that's slightly an aside. What I do is called Cotswold Morris. So it's white shirt, white trousers, lots of ribbons, lots of bells, hat with flowers on it, dancing around nice English countryside, green space with a little village in the background, thatched roofs, all of that kind of stuff, to some English folk music. It's traditional kind of English dancing, and it's quite good fun. And the thing is, I started because it's also a little bit connected. No, it's a lot connected with alcohol. A lot of the people that do it drink, and I started and I thought, this is amazing. I can hang around with all of these people, and they don't think twice about you, having your first drink at 10 in the morning. They were like, oh, this is great. So that was why I started, and then I stopped drinking, and I was like, oh well, am I going to keep dancing? Is it going to be the same? Am I going to enjoy it as much? But I thought, well, I've made a commitment to these guys, and I'll go along and I'll dance for all the stuff that I've signed up for, just because they need the help and everything. So I went along and I really enjoyed it. It's like, oh, this is quite interesting. What I realized was that what I enjoyed was enjoy wearing silly hats, but I enjoyed the dancing. I enjoyed spending time with the people. I enjoy the places that we go to. I enjoy the tradition. I enjoy the fact that it makes me feel like a part of the town I live in. I enjoy all of that stuff around it. And actually, what I came to realize was it was never really about the alcohol. And I think that extends to a lot of people. They think that they enjoy drinking. You don't enjoy drinking, you enjoy sport. You don't enjoy drinking, you enjoy a good meal. You don't enjoy drinking, you enjoy your friends. That's because your friends are quite interesting.
Right. Very interesting. So this dancing, is it a competition like thing? Do you go from town to town and compete? Or is it more of a demonstration? Or how does it all
There's
make
not
happen?
really much point in competing because basically my side's the best.
I love it.
No, it's more of a demonstration kind of thing. So there are lots of big folk festivals where you'll see 20, 30 different groups, and we'll all just dance around and we'll just all have a good time kind of thing. But we do so we do events, we do weddings, done a few corporate things, just to kind of liven things up a little bit. And yeah, I mean, it is just for fun.
I love that. Well, and I think it's so important to have something like that in your life if you don't, some kind of hobby.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially if
absolutely. And
you're home alone drinking or you're home alone eating and you're lonely, having something like that to pull you out and, whether it's to the gym or to a sporting event or to dance or whatever, I think it's a really something that everybody should try to do.
yeah, yeah. So I often come back to a comment that Johan Hari made first in a TED talk and then in his book, Chasing the Scream. And he said that the opposite of addiction isn't abstinence, the opposite of addiction is connection. And he's absolutely right. And I mean, that, dancing, it kind of highlights all of the different connections, because yes, there's a connection to the other people, and it gets you out and it gets you talking to other people, and that is so important. And isolation, it's just devastating for everything, physical, mental health, whatever. Isolation is terrible. So it is the connection with other people, but it's also, well, what's so great about dancing? It actually connects you a little bit more with your body, and I think that's an important connection that we tend to underestimate the importance of. Basically, that was Aristotle's fault, wasn't it? He said there was no connection between the mind and the body. And I love Aristotle, the kind of the Elvis of philosophy, but
Right.
just, he was dead wrong about that. So it's connection with your body, but it's the connection with the community. It's the connection with a tradition. It's the connection with something that's much older than yourself. And I think, getting to the point where, realizing that, yes, that is who I am. That is what I like doing. And I like doing it because it involves wearing silly hats and showing off. And that is who I am. Yeah, and that strengthens your connection to yourself. And I think that's so important, and something that we often overlook, that we think about relationships with other people and we fail to see that, what dictates that relationship more than anything else is your relationship with yourself.
I love that. That is a good thing to try to end on. But tell me where people can find you and find your book, and if they're interested in this subject matter, get some help, perhaps.
So if you wanted to get a copy of Real Men Quit, that's just on Amazon. It's dead easy to find, because Real Men and Quit are all words that are very easy to spell. So just put that into Amazon.
Is that
So
why you
that's
named
quite
it that?
easy.
Because it was easy to spell?
Um, well, I don't know. It just kind of came to me and
No, I
seemed
like it.
like, yeah, it seemed like a kind of punchy title. So I ran
Yes.
with that.
Awesome.
Get Over Indulgence. I suppose indulgence, that's pretty hard to spell. So to make it easy for your listeners, I'd like to offer them a free copy of that. They can download the Kindle version or the PDF, or if you can stand listening to me for 3 hours and 45 minutes, they can download the audio version. And all they have to remember is getover.uk, which is like very easy to spell, isn't it?
Getover.uk. Okay.
Yeah, so just put getover.uk into the internet. That will take you to a bit of my website where you can download Get Over Indulgence for free. And obviously, that's a bit of my website. So the maybe drink a little bit less quiz, what I was talking about earlier. If you want to find out where your drinking's at, that's a good place. You can do that there. But, you can also find out about the work that we do. There's lots of content on there. I'm also very busy on the socials. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, if you send me a message, if I can't help you, I'll be more than happy to point you in the direction of somebody who can.
Awesome. Well, this has been super pleasant. I've loved meeting you. Anything else we need to say before we start to wrap this up?
Well, if I had the opportunity to say this to everybody on the entire planet, I would. And it is simple, and it is, you are enough. You don't need food. You do need food. You don't need junk food. You don't need cigarettes. You don't need alcohol. You don't need Facebook. You don't need so much of the junk that we amass around us, because everything that you need to live an enjoyable and fulfilling life is inside you, because, you are enough.
I love that. That's perfect. Perfect way to end. I appreciate this so much. This is Duncan Bhaskaran Brown, and the website is getoveruk.uk, right?
That's the one.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
That's my absolute pleasure. And look, I appreciate you for serving your community, and all the hard work that you do. And I hope everybody goes and gives you a 5-star review to
Oh,
help you get the
yes.
message out there
That's
as well.
that's always helpful. Yeah, everyone go give me a 5-star review. I love that. All right. Well, it was really nice meeting you. And everybody out there, if you want to know more, you can email me as well. And it's jacapeldvm@gmail.com. And I'd love to speak with all of you. And have a beautiful week. Bye. Bye, Duncan.
Bye now. Thank you.